Hamilton lineage. Somewhere in 1800s.
The storm was already overhead when she opened the servants' corridor. Thunder murmured like a warning from the heavens, low and constant. Rain tapped at the window panes, light at first, then louder, like fingers drumming in panic. In the distance, the bells of St. Michael's Church told a final note. Charleston was sleeping, but not the Hamilton estate. Inside, the air was thick, too quiet, too still. She moved quickly, barefoot, the hem of her white nightgown soaked from the stone floors. Her hand trembled as it clutched the lantern, the only source of light in the dark, sprawling house. The flame flickered with each step, casting long shadows against the hall's marble columns. Her breath came shallow. Her chest rose and fell like she'd been running, though her feet made barely a sound. Behind her, he followed, silent, barefoot like her, a satchel slung over his shoulder, a leather strap tight across his chest. Samuel. Man who should not have been in the house. A man who had no name in these walls, only tasks and punishments. A man raised in chains, born on this soil, but never once allowed to own an inch of it. And yet now, they moved together like ghosts. One step, then another, toward the gate. Toward something neither of them dared say aloud. Outside, the wind howled like it knew what was coming. She glanced back. He nodded once. They reached the final corridor, the narrow stone passage that led to the rear exit just past the orchard wall. The dog barked once, then silence. A voice behind them. Too close. Evelyn? Her name cracked through the night like lightning. She froze. Samuel stopped. The lantern shook. A click. Metal on metal. Then, a gunshot. The lantern dropped. Glass shattered. The flame vanished. And with it, everything. In the dark, there was screaming. Heavy footsteps, a door flung open, someone shouting, "Get the boys." Another voice, "She's with him." And just like that, the house awoke. The Hamilton estate, once cloaked in its false civility, erupted in chaos. Servants ran half-dressed down the stairs. The master's study door slammed open. The bells rang again, not from the church, but from the house. The girl of the house. The daughter. Gone, and with him. With a slave. Imagine it. Imagine being there, watching from the shadows as two worlds collided, not from war or politics or paperwork, but from a look, a touch, a choice made under moonlight, a mistress, a runaway, and a secret that set fire to generations of Southern pride. They were seen, but they were not caught. Not yet. Not this night. By morning, the Hamiltons would hang the shutters. The judge would call in favors. A story would be spun, but beneath it all, the damage was done. Because that night, the line between love and treason had been crossed, and the bloodline that ruled this house would never recover. What secret burned so hot between them that it scorched an entire Southern legacy? By morning, the Hamilton estate looked untouched. The storm had passed. The hedges were trimmed. The curtains in the parlor swayed gently in the breeze, and the kitchen bustled with the usual clatter of plates and coffee spoons. No one would guess what had happened just hours earlier, or who was now missing. From the outside, it was a portrait of Southern perfection. A double staircase swept up to a second-floor balcony. A brass bell above the dining hall rang for meals, and a freshly painted sign hung on the gate. No entry without invitation, but step inside the world Evelyn Hamilton had once called home. And the illusion cracked. Velvet-lined chairs sat atop floors scrubbed raw by hands that had never known rest. The grand chandelier sparkled above a room where no black child was allowed to look up. The smell of citrus polish masked the mildew of the slave quarters just steps away, a stench of sweat, urine, and rotting wood that no perfume could truly hide. Evelyn had grown up breathing in both. Her mother's hands were soft, always gloved. Her father's, ink-stained from court, orders. She was taught to play piano at age 6, read French at 8, and sip tea at 12, all while slaves stood silently nearby, refilling her cup before it could run dry. But even as a girl, she watched. She listened. The way the overseer barked, orders that made grown men flinch. The way her cousin laughed when a boy no older than 10 was forced to pick thorns out of his own palms. The sound of chains clinking near the smokehouse, faint and constant. And Samuel? He never set foot inside the main house except to clean the halls. Never spoke unless asked, and even then, only in the shortest answers. He was the son of a field worker and a washerwoman, born behind the barn during a thunderstorm, marked as property before he could even walk. They gave him no surname, no birth record, just a number in a ledger. He grew tall, strong, and quiet. He learned to patch wounds, carry loads twice his weight, and stay invisible. But Evelyn noticed him. At first, just his face, then his posture. Proud even when carrying burdens meant for oxen. And later, the way he looked at her, not with fear, but with something closer to defiance. Not desire, not longing, just equal. And in this world, that was the most dangerous thing of all. Imagine living in a house where your laughter echoed off of marble walls, while others weren't even allowed to speak. Imagine waking up in silk, while those who served you slept on straw. Imagine knowing that just beyond your breakfast table, someone your age was being whipped because they dared to take a second biscuit. And now imagine falling in love across that line. Not because it was rebellion, but because it was truth. The Hamiltons weren't just slave owners, they were public figures, political allies. Evelyn's father was one of the architects behind South Carolina's slave code revisions, the very laws that made it illegal to teach someone like Samuel to read. He'd once told her, "Everything has its place, Evie. Even people. Especially people." But Evelyn never forgot the day she saw Samuel place a hand on a wounded dog, whisper something to calm it, and carry it to safety. No violence, no fear. She had never seen her father show that kind of mercy, and over time, her walks through the garden became longer. Her glances at the hedge line lingered. The space between them, girl and slave, began to bend. It wasn't supposed to. It wasn't allowed to. But it did. And that's where this story begins to darken. Because love between a mistress and a slave was more than scandal. It was treason against everything the South was built on. It wasn't just a sin. It was a threat to bloodlines, inheritance, and power. That's why no one could ever know. Not the other slaves, not the housemaids, certainly not her brother Thomas, the one with a musket under his bed and a temper. That needed no excuse, and so they hid it. Behind locked doors, hidden paths, stolen hours in the garden shed, the greenhouse, and only once, inside the library when no one else was home. Every moment was a risk. Every touch could mean a lashing. Every kiss, a funeral. But still, they kept choosing each other. Because when the world robs you of your name, your freedom, your right to be seen as human, love becomes rebellion, and rebellion becomes survival. But survival, it doesn't last long when the walls start to whisper, and someone, somewhere, had already heard them. What happened next wasn't just betrayal, it was punishment. The first time they touched, it was by accident. Evelyn had dropped a book, a leather-bound volume of poetry, behind the greenhouse bench. Samuel, tending to the lemon trees nearby, reached for it at the same time. Their fingers brushed. Just skin on skin, a second no more, but it cracked something open. He drew back immediately, eyes low, jaw set. She muttered a thank you and walked away without turning. But her heartbeat didn't slow for hours. After that, the encounters became patterns, not arranged, not spoken, but somehow inevitable. Evelyn began leaving her books out in the greenhouse, pages marked by a folded petal. Samuel began responding, not in words but in flowers. Pressed violets inside the covers, a sprig of rosemary tucked beneath the spine. No one said anything. No one had to. Because in a world where speech was dangerous, silence became its own language. They met behind the laundry lines first. A quick conversation. A warning passed between them in whispers. Evelyn asking questions she was never meant to ask. Samuel answering with pauses long enough to remind her of the risk. "Did it hurt?" she asked once, tracing a scar down his forearm with her eyes. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She had known pain, but never his kind. Hers was the pain of expectations, tight corsets, polite lies. His was carved into his body, into his bloodline. Still, she stayed, and he let her. They began to read, together. In secret. Books Evelyn stole from her father's study. Voltaire, scripture, poetry. Sometimes she would read aloud. Other times she would mouth the words and let him read her lips in the candlelight. One night, she brought him a letter. A freedom petition, forged unsigned, just a draft. "I could have it written for real," she whispered. "I could send it north." Samuel stared at her for a long time. Then he shook his head. "Freedom on paper means nothing if it's bought with chains." That night she cried. That was the night they kissed. It wasn't passionate. It wasn't wild. It was desperate. Quiet. The kind of kiss you give when the world might rip it away. The next day, and maybe it did, because after that everything changed. They planned their escape slowly, carefully. A boatman Evelyn had bribed years earlier still docked near the marshes. He asked no questions. He took coin and gave silence. Their meeting was set, October 9th, 3 hours before dawn. One lantern, a symbol, a signal, one last chance. But fate doesn't like secrets. They never heard the servant girl behind the curtains, never saw the stable boy pass too slowly by the greenhouse, never noticed Evelyn's brother Thomas watching her walk the orchard paths a little too often. Always alone. And then came the first sign. The letter, once hidden beneath Evelyn's pillow, was gone, replaced with a note. "We know." She showed it to no one, not even Samuel. Instead, she went to the well that night, unlatched the bottom of the wooden bucket, and slipped their escape map inside. A ritual now, a habit. One more step toward the gate, but the next morning, the well was sealed. Evelyn said nothing. Samuel didn't ask. They just moved faster, because they both knew what happened to people who crossed lines in the South. White women who loved black men didn't get trials, and slaves who touched their masters' daughters didn't get graves with names. Imagine planning your freedom knowing every creaking floorboard could betray you. Imagine holding someone's hand in the dark, not out of affection, but to be sure they were still breathing. They didn't run because it was romantic. They ran because the walls were closing in, because love had turned into evidence, because someone had whispered, because someone had lied. And now, there was no time left, but this was only the beginning, because what came next was fire. The house had turned colder. Not in temperature when it was still deep southern autumn, the kind where the humidity stuck to your neck like fingers, but in atmosphere. Something was different. Tight. Like the walls themselves were listening. Evelyn noticed it first. The sudden stops in conversation when she entered a room. The way her father looked at her plate longer than usual at dinner. The sound of footsteps outside her bedroom. That never knocked. And Samuel, he felt it too. He began moving differently. Shorter routes, fewer pauses, eyes darting more than usual. His hands trembled once while stacking firewood, and when Evelyn asked why, he didn't answer. Because the answer was obvious. They were being watched. One evening, while delivering linens to the guest quarters, Evelyn caught her brother, Thomas, rifling through her drawers. He smiled when he saw her. Said he was looking for a book, but the look in his eyes said otherwise. 2 days later, the escape map disappeared. Then came the warning. The stable boy, the one who had always avoided eye contact, slipped a note under the pantry door. Just 4 words. "You're not safe anymore." That night, Evelyn snuck into her father's study. She opened his drawer and found a folded paper. Orders for a private investigator, instructions to track her movement, and a bounty, not written in coin but in silence. Samuel's name was nowhere, just his description, a shadow, a body, a target. Imagine knowing that someone has written your love into a death sentence and signed it with your bloodline. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She didn't eat the next day. She wore her hair pinned high, dressed herself in gray, and walked the house like a ghost. She was already mourning. Not a person, but a future that might never come. Samuel came to her in the laundry quarters just before dusk. They didn't speak. He simply placed his hand on her shoulder, nodded, and said 2 words. Tonight, rain or not. The boatman had sent word. A single coin wrapped in twine, slipped beneath the chicken coop. That was his signal. It was time. She packed nothing but her locket and 2 pages of scripture torn from the family Bible. He carried only a satchel with dried apples and a carving knife, the same one he'd once used to cut his name into the underside of the slave quarters. They would meet at the kitchen door. 3:02 a.m. cross the orchard, follow the trail behind the cemetery, and when they reached the rear gate, 1 lantern would lead them to the marsh, but nothing in the south dies quiet. At 2:58 a.m., thunder rolled across the sky. Evelyn stepped into the corridor barefoot. The lantern shook in her hand, its flame flickering like it too was scared. She walked past portraits of ancestors, men with powdered wigs and women with hollow eyes, all of them staring down on her with judgment. Behind her, Samuel followed. Soundless, but every step held centuries of defiance. Outside, a dog barked once, then again. A shutter slammed. Someone stirred. A voice. Evie, her brother's voice. The kind that doesn't question, only commands. She froze. The lantern in her hand trembled. And then, a gunshot. Glass shattered. The flame vanished. Darkness swallowed them whole. Samuel pulled her down behind the rose hedge. Another shot rang out. Bark ripped from the tree beside them. They ran. Not with speed, with desperation. Limbs cutting through rain, feet slipping in the mud, her nightgown catching on roots, his shoulders slick with blood. The orchard passed. In seconds, the cemetery in shadows. They reached the gate, but behind them more voices, more lights, more dogs. Evelyn turned. Samuel grabbed her hand. They kept running. No more kisses, no more poetry. Just the sound of breath, thunder, and footsteps that refused to stop. Would you have kept going? Would you have run toward the water, knowing what might wait on the other side? They did, but they didn't know what was waiting on this side. And the cost of crossing that final line still hadn't been paid. By dawn, Charleston was burning. Not in flames, not yet, but in scandal. The Hamilton name, once whispered with reverence, now hissed from the mouths of neighbors like poison. Doors closed when the family's carriage rolled past. Invitations dried up. The servants who remained did so with downcast eyes, stepping lightly around the rotting silence that clung to the estate. But inside that house, chaos had already taken hold. Thomas Hamilton returned from the failed pursuit with blood on his sleeve. Samuel's or his own, no one could tell. His knuckles were bruised, his voice gone from screaming into the trees. They ran, he told his father. They ran together. Judge Hamilton didn't reply. He simply stared out the window, watching the rain hammer the gardens Evelyn once strolled barefoot. His jaw clenched, his legacy shattered by his daughter's feet. Evelyn, his only child, gone with a man who wasn't even allowed to speak in her presence 5 years ago. In his study, he uncorked a bottle of brandy and drank it in silence. He didn't weep. He didn't shout. He simply folded her portrait face down and whispered, "I warned you." Outside, the search parties combed the riverbanks. Blood had been found on the eastern fence, a trail that vanished into the reeds. A shoe near the marsh, a lantern shattered, half submerged in the mud, but no bodies, only whispers. The boatman was never seen again. His dock sat rotting. Some said he was paid off. Others said Thomas found him first. Whatever the truth, Evelyn and Samuel had vanished. But their disappearance was a fire, and that fire devoured the Hamilton name. The judge's investments were quietly dropped by his northern partners. His political allies withdrew their support. The press ran thinly veiled editorials, a family divided by desire, the dangers of indulgent daughters. He tried to fight it, wrote letters, gave statements, blamed abolitionist plots. But it didn't matter, because in the South, bloodlines were everything, and his had been contaminated. Inside the house, Evelyn's room was sealed. Her clothes burned in the hearth. Her name was scrubbed from the family Bible. Samuel's quarters were torn apart, boards ripped from the floor, bricks cracked from the hearth. They found a pressed flower between the stones, wilted but still red. Thomas crushed it beneath his boot. In town, the story morphed with every retelling. Some said Evelyn had been taken, seduced, kidnapped, ruined. Others believed she ran willingly, smiling, barefoot in the rain with her hand in his. One woman swore she saw them boarding a boat to the north, Evelyn's hair tied up like a farm girl's, Samuel limping but alive. Another claimed she saw a gravestone deep in the woods marked only with the initials EH, but no proof ever surfaced, and without proof, only the silence remained, that and the shame. The Hamilton lineage, 4 generations of judges, lawmakers, and war veterans, reduced to a cautionary tale. You could still hear Evelyn's name in drawing rooms, but only in whispers, only as a warning. Don't end up like her. But what did she become? A fugitive, a rebel, or finally, for the first time, free? What they shared wasn't a fantasy. It wasn't a romance wrapped in roses and silk. It was muddy, bleeding, real. It was 2 people, one chained by skin, the other by blood, choosing each other in a world built to keep them apart. They didn't just escape a house, they escaped a system, but not without a cost. Because in the end, it wasn't just 2 lovers who disappeared. It was a family name, a legacy, an entire Southern ideal, struck down by a kiss, by a hand held too long in the dark, by a lantern that never reached the gate. And now, all that remained of the Hamiltons were ashes. Years passed, and the Hamilton estate stood, but no longer proud. The gardens grew wild. Ivy crawled up the southern walls like veins over a corpse. The grand parlor, once filled with music and laughter, collected only dust and silence. No guests arrived. No staff remained. The chandelier never lit again. Judge Hamilton aged fast. His hair grayed within a year. His hands, once steady in courtrooms, trembled by morning light. His name, once mentioned in political circles, became a ghost of polite pity. People nodded when they passed him in the street, but never invited him inside. Evelyn's room remained locked. No one spoke of it, but servants said they sometimes heard footsteps there even after midnight. The sound of bare feet crossing the floor, the creak of the window latch opening, as if someone was still waiting for the sound of footsteps in return. One night, a maid swore she saw a lantern glowing faintly at the edge of the orchard. Another claimed to find a pressed flower beneath the garden bench, not wilted but fresh. And then there was the child, or rather, the rumor of one. A woman from Colombia claimed a light-skinned girl appeared in her schoolhouse one spring morning, clutching a note signed E.H. Another whispered tale spoke of a pair, a mother and son, living on the outskirts of New Orleans. The boy dark-eyed and clever, his speech marked by books far beyond his age. None of it could be confirmed, but none of it could be denied. Because Evelyn Hamilton and Samuel didn't vanish. They echoed through the land, through the stories whispered between the lines of newspapers, through the dreams of girls who refused to obey, and the nightmares of men who built their homes on obedience. The Hamiltons tried to rewrite history. They burned letters, tore pages, paid off witnesses, but some truths refuse to die. They survive, in scars, in songs, in bloodlines, and in stories like this one. Today, the Hamilton estate is just a ruin. Tourists pass it without notice. But if you walk the eastern path before dawn, some say you'll find a lantern, unlit, but warm to the touch, resting beneath the oldest oak. No name, no message, just a symbol. A final quiet reminder of what happens when love crosses the lines drawn by hate, because Evelyn didn't run for thrill, and Samuel didn't flee out of fear. They ran because the world would never allow them to walk, and maybe they died in that marsh, or maybe they didn't. Maybe they lived long enough to raise children who never knew chains, children who only heard the word slave in books. Children who never learned to bow their heads when a white man passed. We'll never know, but maybe that's the point. Because in the end, they became more than fugitives. They became myth, the kind of myth that terrifies those who built the chains and strengthens those still trying to break them. So if you're still here, still listening, know this. Stories like this must never be forgotten. Not because they're romantic, not because they're rare, but because they are true. And because every generation deserves to know that somewhere, sometime, a white mistress and an enslaved man chose love over legacy and lit a fire that even time could not put out. If you want to uncover more untold truths, stay with us for what comes next.